Hi, my name is Justine, and I'll be walking you through a visual analysis of my infographic on the Amazon rainforest. It was inspired by my trip to Brazil this past summer. The first topic I'd like to cover is visual potential and the 5 different kinds: appearance, number, time, location, and relationship. I will also be talking about different types of encoding I've used in my displays. Appearance as visual potential shows you what something looks like. This is the potential to use representations that viewers will recognize or will teach them about how something or someone looks like. The combination of shape, texture, and color all add to exploiting some object's visual potential. For example, in my displays, I've exploited the visual potential of appearance by using different line weights to create shapes, textures, and colors to show you what each object or concept looks like. Several of my displays exploit the visual potential of appearance because you can easily see that each of these shapes combinations of lines, shapes, and colors create trees, maps, a toucan, a cow, and coffee plants. Number as the visual potential shows you how much of something there is. Visually, it is the amount, size, opacity, or saturation of a display. In my numbers display, I have exploited the visual potential of numbers by showing how much annual deforestation there is and what the main causes of deforestation are. I've encoded the amount of annual forest loss by the height of the bars, meaning taller bars means more deforestation. I've also encoded time in this display based on the position of the bars. Farther to the right means farther in time. You can also see in this numbers display that I've used the actual shape of the cow here to show the information that 65% of cattle ranching causes deforestation, and similarly here in the coffee plant one where 25% of small and large scale agriculture cause deforestation. Time as visual potential shows you when something happened. It translates the relative position into relative time. In my display, I've exploited the visual potential of time by showing the average rainfall over the course of a year in the Amazon. And just as I did in my numbers display, I encoded time based on the position of the data points, meaning that the further to the right you get is further in time. So from January to December, and it shows kind of the trend of the average rainfall over the course of the year. Location as visual potential shows you where something is. It's the potential to use position on the page or the screen to represent positions of things or places relative to each other in the real world. For example, in my display, I've exploited its location potential by using parts of a map to show countries that have varying amounts of forest area. You can see where Brazil is relative to other locations in the world, and you can also see where the Amazon River Basin is relative to other countries in South America. Here I've used color saturation to encode the amount of forest area, meaning the deeper teal is more forest area versus the lighter teal, which shows less forest area. I also chose to use teal to represent forest cover because most people associate the color with greenery and nature. And the position and location are encoded on the map because the further up you get shows you the more north you can get. Further right is east, further down is south, and to the left would be west. I chose to use a sequential colored choropleth map rather than a proportion map because it made the most sense for the type of data I was trying to visualize, since forest cover is a continuous data type, and so having one single color hue shows like a more of a continuous type of data rather than using something discrete or having a stepped color, which wouldn't really make sense for the type of data I was showing. The last type of visual potential is relationship. It's the potential to use connections between shapes on a page to represent connections between things or people in the real world. In my display, I've used a process diagram to visualize the rainforest water cycle. The arrows show the direction in which the water moves, which point to different stages of the water cycle. So you'll see here we kind of start up with atmospheric pressure, which points down to evaporation from the soil, precipitation, and storage. So it's kind of moving from this top section here downwards, at which point it'll come back up through evotranspiration. And here's just a closer look of what that relationship display actually looked like on the final infographic. I'll now go over my color and visual language models. I placed my infographic side by side. No. I'll now go over my color and visual language model. I've placed my infographic side by side with the color model I chose to use. Each of my displays emulated the color model by following the same proportion of colors used with the same strategies. Here's a color inventory of the color model. So based on the color inventory, I tried to make the majority of my display use a lot of the light gray as the background, a lot of the teal, some of the yellow, and then the different grays and the light blues here that you see were used a little bit less frequently or for smaller bits and pieces like text or lines. The color harmony of the colors is analogous, meaning the colors lie along the same quadrant of the color wheel. So you can see here they kind of point in this range of colors from the green to the yellow-orange. I only use these colors when creating individual displays, and I follow the same text color and background combinations as well as the same graphic color and background combinations. So for example, this dark gray, teal, and orange-yellow text can be used on the light gray background, and the light gray and the dark gray can be used on a teal background. Generally, all of the colors can mix and touch each other for other graphical elements. So for example, in this portion of the infographic, you can see that I've used the same color strategies. I've used the orange, the yellow, and the teal colors for text. And here we can see that I've used the light gray on top of the teal. And while my color model doesn't use specific colors to encode different meanings, it does use color to emphasize and highlight important words or phrases. So at least in this body of text here, I've tried to highlight evotranspiration, precipitation, and then like here, atmosphere, as well as these larger statistics. Anytime the color teal is used, the yellow-orange is kind of used to emphasize different pieces of information. So you can kind of see here I've tried to use teal as the main color, whereas the yellow-orange is used as a supplementary piece of information there. I've also tried to trigger associations with some displays using the teal to represent growth, nature, and generally positive facts, like we can see here with the relationship display, which lends itself pretty well to the rainforest water cycle because of the blue-green of the teal. But I've also used the orange as more of a cautionary color for a negative connotation, like I've used in this number display, because it's representing deforestation. I would have also used yellow for the text as a color association strategy, but I found that using teal here instead helped make the precision labels more emphasized because of the contrast. I also quickly want to cover how I've emulated the visual language model in my displays. My visual language model uses a combination of fill and stroke to create three-dimensional, realistic graphical elements like you can see in the cars here. Heavier weighted lines are used for the outlines, whereas lighter weighted lines are used for some finer details like the spokes on the wheels here. It also uses some flatter 2D elements like the silhouettes along the side here. And while the majority of the displays are quite smooth, the overall use of space and lines are used to create a more boxy appearance. You'll notice here how the cars fill up the section and how these elements are neatly aligned to fill up the space. This little bracketed line that they have here overarching the cars is seen throughout the length of the actual infograph. And then, for example, in this display, you can see how, oh, I have background text here. You can see how I've tried to kind of emulate the same visual language with the thicker outlines for the outsides and then the thinner detail lines to add dimension to each of the displays. I've also tried to emulate the same boxiness of the sections, so I've had the heading lines kind of go across the width of the infograph and the little bracketed lines that they also use to fill up the space. Now I'll cover my typography model. The typography model I chose was the Now I'll cover my typography model. The typography model I chose was the infographic about the Harvard Law School. The main fonts used in my infographic are DIN condensed bold for the title text, Avenir Next condensed demi bold for the heading text, and Avenir Next condensed medium for body text and annotations and axis labels. This font, DIN condensed bold, was the exact font that they used in the Harvard Law School infographic, but I couldn't find the exact font that they used for their body text and their headings. But Avenir demi bold with the right tracking and leading gave this similar appearance. You'll also notice that they only use caps for titles and headings, which generally makes it a little bit more difficult to read all caps, but because they're only used for shorter pieces of text and the size of the infographic itself was quite large, it didn't really seem to make too big of a difference. Precision labels are used on my number displays to show the precise amount being visualized. So in this numbers display, the bar height is showing that there are around 29,000 or 30,000 square kilometers of forest loss, but the precision label shows you exactly the amount, so 29,059 square kilometers of annual forest loss. I've also used identity labels in a number of my displays to simply identify different objects. In this display, I've used identity labels to show how each of the countries here on the right-hand side make up part of the Amazon River Basin. I've also included bits of text in some displays to annotate and describe more information that may have not been clear from just the graphical element itself. So for example, I have this little bit of text here to kind of give a little bit more background information about the Amazon River Basin. I've used proximity and white space to associate labels with the things that they're actually labeling. You can see here that I've placed this larger bit of text closer to the actual Brazil country, and here how I have kind of the 9 countries span the Amazon River Basin. These are 2 separate bits of text, but because I've placed them closer together, they seem like they're one unit. In terms of legibility, the value contrast is pretty good in most displays, the only exception to that being the orange-yellow when it was used on this light blue here. And this is the only time that I went against my color model, and I kind of did that for 2 reasons. One being that it was the title of the infographic. I wanted to draw the most attention to the top, so I tried to incorporate all the colors. And 2, because I wanted to use the orange-yellow to trigger a negative association with the words that I was highlighting. So I highlighted deforestation and global warming versus highlighting mosaic of ecosystems and the largest rainforest, which are generally pretty good things about the rainforest. In the body of the text, I followed the same text strategies used in my typography model. So I changed the leading of the text to 26 point, which was the line spacing, which you can kind of see here. And I set the tracking to normal because it just fit my typography model best. In terms of readability, all of the text was left aligned, and sentences were never longer than the width of the column they were positioned in. For some displays, I tried to wrap the text more cleanly around the graphical element they were next to, like this bit of text about the Amazon River Basin that you saw earlier in the location display. And similarly for the numbers display, to avoid hitting another bar that was kind of like right up against the right-hand side, I tried to condense it and keep it within the width of the actual precision label. The next topic we'll be discussing is visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy refers to the variation in visual prominence of different elements of a display. So more prominent elements will catch the viewer's attention first, and they're usually perceived as being more important. Due to the detail in some of my displays, some visual hierarchy is kind of sacrificed, but this was mitigated by the way I had to visually separate elements in a top-down fashion, which was complementary of my layout model. Now, because of how my headings extend the entire width of the infographic, it's easy to separate and distinguish which pieces of information should be read first. So for example, at this top portion of my infographic, the title is separate from the body of the display, making it more prominent. Also, certain facts or bits of text that are important are usually written using the DIN condensed bold font, like you can see here, also the title. And the relationship display takes up a majority of this section, which makes it more prominent than at least the time display that you can see here to the right. I've used the same text strategy in this display, where larger text draws the eye of the viewer in, like you can see in this location display. This bit of text, the 481 million hectares are found in Brazil, that one is predominantly larger than at least these body text because it's kind of a standalone fact. And I've used the direction of the bracket here to draw the eye of the viewer to zoom in on the portion of South America. And once again, I've used a larger text for some of the precision labels here in the bottom numbers display. The next topics we'll be covering are unity and variety. Unity is when visual attributes like size and color, shape, and texture are repeated across a display to make it feel more uniform, while variety refers to any variation in color, texture, size, or shape. In my infographic, I've tried to maintain the same boxiness that was used in my visual language model. You can see how I've taken individual displays and made them span across the entire width of the section that they're in. But there's also a variety of like the size of the elements that I've used and the type of boxiness that I've used. So for example, the relationship display here, it's kind of boxy with the way that the arrows are taking up a lot of space. And also within this section, it's much larger than, say, like the boxiness of the time display here. Here are also a number of other displays where I've tried to emulate that same boxiness. I've used the bracketed lines throughout a number of these displays. So in the top portion, the arrows that were in the relationship display, and also here in the location display, I've used the bracket to kind of push the eyes of the viewer to the right. And also in this other numbers display, I've used it to kind of push the eyes to the left. That's another bit of variety where there's similar types of boxes and lines, but they kind of are a little bit different. You can also see here in the location display, I originally had it as a circle to zoom in on Brazil and South America, but I found that changing it to a rectangle, or at least it's more of a rectangle than a square, it helped kind of make the display look a little bit more uniform and have that same type of boxiness. And the final topics we'll cover are layout and alignment. I've placed my infographic side by side with the layout model I chose to use. I liked how this layout model used different sizes of the graphical elements to show more important bits of information, and how it sectioned off different elements, which led the viewer to read in a really easy top-down fashion. Using white space was really important for making the sections of the infographic look separated and cleaned. So the spanning header line that we can see up here was really nice in terms of making the title and also the footer and the sources stand out in comparison to the body of the actual infograph. And I followed basically the same sectioning that the layout model did for different elements. You'll notice that for at least some of the larger displays, they've been split into like 2 different sections. I tried to do the same thing for some of my displays here. You can see like this is one large section, but within it there's like a separate column that would also count as another section. And similarly on the bottom half of the display, I tried to do the same thing where larger elements took up the entire section, and then there were some sectioning off for different items, and you can see it in the footer for the sources and the artist. And in terms of alignment, I really tried to focus on coherence, grouping, and separation to make each element look like it kind of fit cohesively as one infographic. Just as I copied the sectioning, I tried to follow the same horizontal and vertical alignment of my model, as you can see here with the red outlines. Like all the text and most of the columns were left aligned with the same type of columned appearance, and then the horizontal alignment I didn't change at all actually. And that worked out really well with the way that the section headings spanned the width, because it kind of helped to break up the content a lot better. A lot of these displays also had to be resized and rescaled to just be a little bit smaller to allow for more of the white space to show through and really separate each of the individual elements.